Paragons of the Colosseum is now out. So let's take a look at all the competitive decks coming out of this set. And this is the meta that was by far the most competitive in the history of Shadowverse Evolve. So I'm very excited to get into this one. Virtually every class ate really well in this set, but we're going to start off with Forest, as this was the biggest winner at the very beginning of this meta in particular. Amataz is a huge new support for the class, basically giving off a huge payoff to generating pixies. So he says on Fanfare he puts a fairy into your EX area and gives all pixie followers in your EX area +1/+1. This includes both the fairies and the fairy wisps. So just from playing him once, they become 2/2s. You play him again, he becomes, they become 3/3s. You can play Amataz and then bounce him and then play him again to proc this effect twice. And if you engage him, you can then choose 2 pixie followers that are already in play and give them Storm. So basically the game plan is just to farm a bunch of pixies and then swing in with big damage and win very early in the game. So you've got like Spirit Shine, which is a new card in this set too that helps with this game plan as well, letting you buff your tokens even more or generate more fairy tokens. And also Fairy Dragon, that basically is a defensive card that you can put down to build time while you generate your EX area. And if it gets taken out, then it just puts both a wisp and a fairy into your EX area too for the Amataz payoff. You still play a lot of the good utility cards in Forest for this deck. And Rhinoceros is back as well, because now you're already chipping away so much for your opponent's life with not just the Amataz engine, but also like Sukuna, that then just going for the Rhinoceros game plan to evolve it and give it Storm is not actually that crazy either. Another deck that got really popular in this set for Forest is Hunter Forest. So I kind of teased it in the last set, but I did say we talk about it. Izudia is the boss unit from the previous set that basically, when you play it on Fanfare, if you have 3 or more Hunter cards in your cemetery, allows you to choose an enemy follower into an amulet and give it the ability that they can pay 2 to send it to the cemetery. But more importantly, Izudia evolves for 1 and then engages itself on evolve, or not on evolve, but when it is an evolve form, to deal 6 damage to all enemy leaders that have 10 or more defense. So we didn't really have enough good hunters in the past, but now we do. There's a 1-drop in this set that basically allows you to ditch a hunter from hand to do some damage to the opponent's board or leader and then draw a card. So that contributes really well to the game plan. You've got the 2-drop as well that, if it was played by an ability, automatically gets Storm. You're still playing things like Silverbolt and the King Elephant in this deck too, because the combo game plan is really not that hard for this deck to do, but it's a lot more board control-y. It's a lot more of a mid-range deck compared to the Amataz one that is very much just like fast combo, win the game quickly. So I would recommend trying out both and seeing which one you prefer as the Forest mains that I'm assuming you are watching this. Over in the sword department though, things have definitely taken a shift away from the Thief way back to mid-range here, as of course Ralmia is an amazing new card. I mean, being a 2-drop that evolves for 1 less depending on how many followers you have on board, that can basically become free, and then on evolve, if you pay the extra play point cost, you're basically talking about an 8 damage Storm that already, like, you not only have a board that your opponent has to worry about, but now you also have 8 damage Storm going face, which is just insane. And I mean, you look at the rest of this deck, it's so easy to build up this board, right? We do have Kagemitsu in here as well, just because we do evolve a lot in this deck. I mean, you kind of see the evolve deck is very much teched out. A lot of the new cards, but also some of the hero engine too. Heroic Entry also works really well with a lot of the cards, because you'll notice that almost the entire deck is 3 cost or lower, and this is because of the Courtly Dance spell. Courtly Dance is basically what this deck is built around, which is basically like, you want to imagine this is like an aggro mid-range deck. So you're playing out a lot of cheap followers throughout the entire early game. You're going face with whatever you can, and then once you get to turn 6, you just play Courtly Dance, and oftentimes you can just win, especially if you find a Ralmia off of it. And if that's not enough, then I mean, Leonidas is going to be your late game plan. Gemstaff can still search it. So overall, this is a much more aggressive game plan for Sword, but this list itself actually comes from a Shadowverse Evolve CS that happened during the Japanese release, where the player that used this went 7-0, beating the likes of Alice Haven, Hunter Forest, Kuan. So it definitely does have what it takes, but just keep in mind that if the roll is bad, it is going to be a bit of a tough one. But I think for Sword, this is probably the deck that has the highest chance of beating Kuan in this format. So if you're especially preparing for a Kuan heavy format, this does feel like a pretty good choice. Speak of the devil though, Kuan is arguably the scariest and #1 deck from this meta, and a lot of the other decks in this meta will be whether they can beat Kuan or not. Kuan itself is a 15 cost 5/5 that when you would play it, it costs 1 less for each each Onmyoji card and each spell in your cemetery. So if you have, for example, 10 spells and 2 Onmyoji cards, it's going to cost 3. When you do play it, it gives you the Celestial Shikigami on board if you don't have one on the board already, which is a 4/5 with Aura. Just keep in mind that you know, if you play 2 Kuans for 0, for example, you're only going to get 1 Celestial Shikigami on the board. I had a visual that showed something different during the must-haves video, but you can only have 1 on board at a time. And then Kuan's other ability lets it engage itself to choose 2 Shikigami followers and give them Storm. The other Shikigami that you often play is the paper one, which is a 2/2, so it can basically in total get like 6 storm damage on the turn you play this. This of course is paired with Dimension Shift that is played as a 7 cost as long as you banish 10 spells from your cemetery to get an extra turn. So usually you want to play like 2 Kuan, so you get like a 5/5, a 5/5, and a 4/5 on board. You swing with a 4/5 and then you give yourself an extra turn, and then you have another 14 damage on board. So as long as you've managed to chip your opponent down to 18 defense throughout the early game, double Kuan D-Shift will always be game, unless they have a ward that you need to spend something to take out. But you can also use the play points, you know, on your extra turn, I guess, to do that. But then you do lose out on the 4 from the Celestial Shikigami on the first turn. This list comes from my idol, Nini, who was the winner of the GP Chiba last year, which was already in the Idolmaster format. So this build is here to last. It's not just for this format, it's for the next format too. And it's very flexible. I mean, Wind Blast is something you can take out, but you effectively have 3 Angel Snipes in here, with one of them being the Umamusume version. Insight is very important for your turn 1, of course. Demon Caller is of course not just a Onmyoji follower, but also something that helps you trade board and also buffs your tokens that you play, the Shikigami followers that you play as well. You do see a lot of 1-ups that you can search with Merlin in this build though. You got the Call Chain that you basically just play to search for your Kuan. I did mention the pass is going to be very important. You've got the Concentration that I always complain about being a very, very strong heal spell, even without the Earthright. You've got the Ryo 3-cost spell as well, of course, in here that you can just choose. Like, you actually do get 2 spellcasters on the board sometimes, but more often than not, you are just going to be using that spell for the 3 damage, just because that puts them in the range of double Kuan per game. But the biggest card, I guess, is just the Curse Crafter. I mean, Curse Crafter is a card that got restricted down the line in this deck, but it's basically lots of damage. It gets you ways to cycle through with your paper Shikigamis that you play on the board that you destroy yourself. So it's a really good way to trade the board while also building up your cemetery. And honestly, like, I think to fully talk about Kuan and like all the things this deck can do, it would take way longer than the time I have in this video. So if you would like me to do a deep dive into Kuan, please make sure to let me know in the comments below, because I'd be more than happy to do it. I do own this deck as well. I did build it just for practice. I didn't play it in tournaments because I didn't have the time that I would finish on time if I had to play the mirror match. So do keep that in mind if you are building it. But it is a very strong deck that you should 100% be aware of, and I think this is, in my opinion, my favorite build for Kuan. There is a lot you can experiment with, like playing high in line. You can change up the spells a lot depending on what your meta is too. So feel free to experiment, because this deck is very much open to it. And then of course my PhD topic, Gamu, allow me to talk about. So this list is, you know, I like to feature decks that win tournaments in these videos, and usually, you know, be like, oh yeah, this one topped in the CS, like, oh yeah, Nini's Kuan build that he won the GP with. So this Gamu build was built by this guy called DifferentFight, that he brought this to his Tokyo area championship qualifiers, and in the first one, unfortunately, he went all the way to the finals but lost to Kuan, and then he ran it back in the second qualifier, where you only have 3 chances, you can only apply to 3 qualifiers, and in the final qualifier he beat Kuan and secured a spot in the Tokyo championships with this very Gamu list. Definitely shout outs to DifferentFight, they did very well in that one. But jokes aside, you're probably noticing there's no Dragon Oracle in this deck. You cannot afford to even spend a turn to play Dragon Oracle in this meta, in my opinion. I do think you will put back Dragon Oracle in future metas, but basically Gamu becomes a 100% tempo deck that you have to play quite fast and aggressive against Kuan. You have the addition of Phylene in this set. That's a 1-cost 1/3, which is really good on stats, that basically freezes an enemy follower. So you engage it and it cannot refresh during your opponent's next turn. But if you play her on Overflow, she searches your deck for her spell and puts it to EX area. The spell is a 2-drop that costs 1 less if you're on Overflow, that chooses a engaged enemy follower, destroys it, and if Phylene is on board, deals 2 damage to their leader. So Phylene is really good because against decks like Alice Haven or Amataz that want to play early stuff and like aggro you down, you can freeze that aggro and it gives you a chance to counter it as well. With the Bellringer in particular, which is really important in this meta, especially for the 2 damage she does when you evolve her. But just in general, just to build time until you find your piece pieces. It's very, very good. And you can hide some of your more aggressive cards like the Fina behind the Bellringer. Fina's really good in Gamu now because she not only searches you for the Bellringer, but also the Phylene and also the 1-drop Disdain follower. PDK has really good synergy with this deck because now we have even more cards that proc it. Just keep in mind that Bellringer will not proc PDK because it has to be a dragon follower you play. Otherwise, we have a lot of the other good cards in this deck, but just the addition of Phylene in this deck is so huge that it kind of like shifted things, like adding the Fina, playing a bit more aggressively. And I would say it's thanks to that this deck has such a good position in this current meta. Again, if you want to hear me talk more about Gamu and really go in depth on a breakdown of this deck, let me know in the comments, especially for Gamu. I'll easily do it. Abyss had 2 popular archetypes during this format. One was this more aggressive version with Aragavi. So we've seen aggressive Sanguine time and time again. I feel like I've shown similar lists multiple times, and Fina was a huge support in the last set. Uses Mirabane as well. Because your hand is always so low because of how aggressive this is, Mirabane's effect just kind of like goes off by default, which is kind of funny. So you get to the end phase, you have 2 or less hand, boom, 3 damage to your opponent's leader. If you're at 0, then, you know, AoE 3 damage to all your opponent's followers. And if you evolved it, then, you know, you can bump that damage even more. But Aragavi is the new addition in this set that basically is a 3-cost 4/3 that at the start of each of your end phase, if you are in Sanguine, deals 3 damage to enemy leader or follower. So it just adds a bit more of that kind of like mid-range damage, and a lot of your early drop followers do activate Sanguine. And on Fanfare, if you play 5 more play points, so a total of 8, then you can do 5 damage to all of the followers on the field, including your own, and Aragavi becomes a 6/5 with Storm. So it's really good for closing out games in case you don't have enough damage from early on. So if you're into the more aggressive game plan, this is definitely the list for you. However, if you're more of a control fan and you want to use Ginsetsu in particular, then this list will look a bit more familiar. As a Gamu player, I hate playing against this. Freaking Control Abyss is so strong in my opinion, and it was a very underdeveloped deck in my opinion as well, because the people that knew that this deck is good were playing it a lot because it has a discard that makes it already very annoying to play against, but it also has Aragavi for that constant damage ping, and the moment you think you've got them down enough, they play Ginsetsu, they evolve her, they heal up a bunch with the foxes, and you're just crying. So Ginsetsu is the main addition. She's a 6-cost 1/5 that puts 5 of the foxes into your EX area and evolves for 1. When you evolve her, the foxes are basically free to play, and she makes them deal 1 extra damage too, so they all become 2/3s essentially, and every time basically her fox tokens leave play, she gets +1 attack. So the foxes have rush and ward, so you can either leave them up as wards or rush in to take out your opponent's followers, and if they do get taken out, then Ginsetsu gets buffed too. So this is a huge addition to the arsenal that Control Abyss already had that I feel like makes this deck really, really strong, and I really expect the players in the West in particular to pick this deck up and go somewhere with it. So this list can be your first introduction to how to start with it, but you can see it's pretty teched out. Stuff like Kamura, I don't know if you still would want to keep, so I'll allow the PhDs in Control Abyss to take it away. And finally, we have Haven. Endless Haven is one of the best decks in this set too, I would say. The reason why is Bab Kaha just works really well with this deck because you're kind of getting rid of your hand just because of how it works. So Bab Kaha allowing you to rearrange the top cards of your deck or also just buff your other followers as you're aggroing for early game is really, really strong. So you can set up what you're going to draw into so that even if you discard your hand through the eggs, you don't really care too much. And a really cool tech that worked really well in this format was Minyu. Minyu is a 2-cost 2/2 that just has aura and it can evolve for 1. It's a set 1 card, but if you do evolve it, it keeps the aura now as a 3/3. You don't really evolve it that much unless you don't have anything else to do that turn, but the aura is really annoying because if you just play Minyu early, Kuan can't do anything. They cannot target it because aura is the biggest enemy for Kuan. So also if you're playing dragon, make sure to just like play a Forte, evolve it past. Like they can't do anything. They need to use their AoE spells and they don't have that many of them. So Minyu is a really cool tech that costs just 2 play points against the Kuan that I highly recommend you guys try out as well. But the biggest winner for Haven in this set is Ward Haven. Diamond Master, my beloved. If you're a Shadowverse Flame fan, you know that we've been waiting for this one. Thanks to Wilbert, you basically have so much accessibility to searching out your tools, and you also just have a lot of really good Ward Storm followers in this deck to begin with. Like you already had a lot of good stuff from the Diamond Master wave in general, and there's a lot of like little pieces and bits and bobs in here and there that you got over time, and like Jean is a really good generic tool, but the support wave with Wilbert just came in here and it's really, really good. It gives you a bit of that extra little mid-range damage, it gives you a little bit of that extra filtering, and Diamond Master is really well positioned in this meta too because Diamond Master forcing your opponent to choose her whenever they have to make a choice with an effect that format, select something is really good, because if you play against Force and they want a Silver Bolt, it's like, too bad, you're gonna have to select the Diamond Master, you can't select the face. So for that reason, it is very strong. And that's gonna do it for the competitive decks for this set. I think it is a super fun set to play competitively, so I hope a lot of you are gonna grind events during this season. For those of you participating in the Grand Showdown, all the best. For those of you prepping for the BCS circuit, a lot of these decks will be very good as well during the Idolmaster format, so even if you have a BCS after in the next set, it's still very much worth to playtest in this format, because a lot of the time I invested in the set 6 format was very much rewarded when we got into the Idolmaster format, because Idolmaster format was basically just set 6 plus the Idolmaster decks. So definitely do put in the time if you are preparing for events, and I think as a competitive player, this is going to be a super fun meta for you guys. But with that, that is going to be it for this video. If you liked it, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. But with that, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.